You've just boarded a luxury first-class flight. The cabin smells of freshly brewed coffee, the leather seats glisten under soft lighting, and the quiet hum of the engines promises a peaceful journey ahead. You settle into your carefully selected window seat, already picturing yourself enjoying hours of uninterrupted relaxation. But suddenly, something breaks the calm. A flight attendant approaches, wearing a polite but hesitant smile. She leans in and quietly asks you to move, not because of an emergency, not because there's been a mistake, but because another passenger feels they deserve your seat more than you do. This isn't a hypothetical situation. This actually happened. A black woman was asked to give up her VIP seat for a white passenger. And what unfolded next took everyone by surprise. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping story and the unexpected twist that followed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These are the kinds of real-life stories that make you think twice about social norms and privilege, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we've got coming next. Now, let's get into it. It all started on a flight from New York to London, a route often filled with business executives, high-profile clients, and well-to-do travelers enjoying a bit of luxury. Among those passengers was Monica James, a successful entrepreneur who had just wrapped up a week full of meetings and conferences. Exhausted but satisfied with her accomplishments, Monica decided to treat herself by booking a first-class ticket, something she rarely did. Monica stepped onto the plane, dressed immaculately in a sleek blue business suit. Her hair was neatly styled, and her demeanor radiated calm confidence. She made her way to her assigned seat, 2A, a spacious window seat in the front row of the first-class cabin. It was everything she needed: privacy, comfort, and the perfect spot to unwind during the long flight. As the other passengers boarded, Monica quietly made a quick phone call to her assistant, discussing a few last-minute tasks before departure. She barely noticed the commotion happening at the front of the cabin, until it was right in front of her. Two women were standing near the aisle. One of them was a flight attendant, dressed in a crisp white uniform, her expression carefully composed but clearly uneasy. The other woman was striking in appearance, a blonde, impeccably dressed in a vibrant red outfit that seemed carefully chosen to command attention. Her posture was straight, her head held high, and her expression? Confident. Perhaps a little too confident. Monica watched as the flight attendant whispered something to the woman in red, who nodded in agreement. Then, the flight attendant began walking toward Monica's seat. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the flight attendant began with a polite smile. "I hope you're having a pleasant boarding experience." Monica nodded, sensing that there was more to come. "We've encountered a bit of a situation," the flight attendant continued, lowering her voice slightly. "One of our passengers, Mrs. Whitmore, has requested to sit in your seat." Monica tilted her head slightly, confused. "Excuse me?" "Mrs. Whitmore prefers to sit by the window," the flight attendant explained, her tone carefully measured. "She's quite particular about her seating arrangements and was hoping you might be willing to switch seats with her." Monica blinked, processing the request. She had booked this seat weeks in advance. She had paid thousands of dollars for the ticket. Why would she give it up simply because someone else asked? "I'm sorry," Monica said, her tone firm but polite. "I chose this seat specifically when I booked my ticket. I'd prefer to stay here." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing back at Mrs. Whitmore, who was now watching the interaction with a small smile, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Before the flight attendant could respond, Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," Mrs. Whitmore said smoothly, her tone laced with condescension. "I always sit by the window when I fly. It's simply more comfortable for me. I'm sure you wouldn't mind accommodating that, would you?" Monica remained composed. She had dealt with entitled behavior before, especially in professional settings, and she knew how to handle herself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Monica said, maintaining steady eye contact. "But I also prefer the window seat." That's why I booked it." The air between them grew tense. Other passengers in first class began to take notice, some pretending not to listen, while others openly watched the exchange. It wasn't every day you saw such a subtle, yet loaded, confrontation unfold in the quiet luxury of a first-class cabin. Mrs. Whitmore's smile faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of frustration crossed her face. Clearly, she wasn't used to hearing the word no. "Well," she said, straightening her posture, "I think you should reconsider. After all, it's not every day you get the chance to show kindness to someone." Monica's calm demeanor never wavered. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore with quiet strength. "Kindness works both ways," she replied. "I paid for this seat, and I intend to keep it." The silence that followed was deafening. The flight attendant, sensing that things were escalating, quickly intervened. "Perhaps we can find another solution," she suggested, her voice a little more urgent. "Mrs. Whitmore, we do have another window seat available just one row behind." But Mrs. Whitmore wasn't having it. "That's not the same," she said sharply. "I specifically want that seat." At that point, Monica had had enough. Without raising her voice or losing her composure, she addressed both the flight attendant and Mrs. Whitmore. "I'm sorry, but this conversation is over. I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving. If there's an issue, I suggest you speak to the airline." Her tone was final. There was no room for further discussion. Mrs. Whitmore huffed, clearly furious, but she had no choice but to take the other window seat offered by the flight attendant. As she settled into her new seat, she threw Monica a glare, but Monica didn't flinch. She simply pulled out her tablet and began reviewing her notes for an upcoming meeting. As the plane took off, Monica received discreet nods of approval from a few other passengers. One man even leaned over and whispered, "Good for you." Monica smiled to herself. She hadn't set out to make a statement, but sometimes standing your ground sends a powerful message. This story isn't just about a seat on a plane. It's about boundaries, privilege, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Too often, people are asked to compromise what they've earned to accommodate someone else's sense of entitlement. But this story reminds us of something important: it's okay to say no. It's okay to stand your ground when someone crosses a boundary, even if they do it politely, even if they expect you to quietly comply. Because sometimes, saying no is an act of kindness toward yourself. What about you? Would you have given up your seat to avoid confrontation? Or would you have stood your ground like Monica did? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications for more stories that challenge your perspective and leave you thinking long after the video ends. Because sometimes, it's the simplest situations that reveal the most powerful lessons.